Ladies and gents, I am cured. Not many of you know this, but until recently I've been suffering from a debilitating poker disease called being a massive RNG nerd. I've been running an RNG, a random number generator, for a good while now. The reason I've done this is that having made a ton of theoretical content, it came to my understanding that loads of spots were mixed. You know, one play and another play are equally good theoretically. And I've always known that's not the case in practice. I've always known that our opponents have different ranges in many ways, some of them subtle, some of them less subtle to GTO, and that it's necessary to pick the front runner play in many situations. It's necessary to adjust and only do one thing because that thing is better than the alternative. And while I think I've been quite good at deviating and exploiting, the problem has been that it's put me in a bad frame of mind. Having an RNG and clicking and thinking about mixing, it's put me in this robotic frame of mind where I've actually closed my eyes and I've not been able to be imaginative enough, creative enough, and I've just not been able to find the highest EV play in loads of spots. I have accessed my A game from time to time and I've made content celebrating that sometimes when I've been able to, but since throwing the RNG in the garbage and saying, do you know what, when I think I'm indifferent, I'll just pick a line, and putting myself in more of a flow state where I'm sort of engaged but also relaxed and not having to overthink, I've been playing amazingly well. I've been playing so much better, and I've actually accessed a kind of gear of intuition and subconscious poker thought that I haven't really been able to consistently access for years. I'm cured. I'm going to talk about how you can be cured too. Let's get into this video. Let's review some spots. What we're going to do today, ladies and gents, is the unthinkable, the unfathomable for Carrot Corner poker education. This is actually something that we've never attempted before, and we're probably going to fail, but I'm going to give it my best shot. We're going to attempt to go over 14 hands. 14! That's less than 2 minutes per hand. That means that deep diving into the realms of GTO and blockers and the pits of solver mayhem, it's not going to be possible. I'm going to have to stop rambling. I'm going to have to be concise and contain my inner, nerdy, explorative child. How is this going to go? I don't know. I've never tried such a fast hand review before. I'm going to show you how we're dominating and destroying this pool. This comes from 100 Russian cash on GG. This is part of the special content that's coming your way at carrotcorner.com later in the year. You're going to be able to subscribe to our members-only video library. We're going to watch my bankroll challenge that begins at this stake on GG Poker, as well as game selection, grinds on stars at higher stakes, and content from other coaches too. That's coming your way this September 2023 at carrotcorner.com. More details coming in the weeks to follow about how to become a member. So we open ace 3 here. This is a weaker player. This is a hand that if you follow GTO, it will say open ace 4 and better. That's arbitrary. It's ludicrous. And of course, the true EV of opening this hand is higher than that of folding, because villain's going to under 3-bet, it's going to play badly, make mistakes post-flop. We check, leaving the opponent's range really wide. Villain, if they're not a schooled player, and they're not, because they're a random shorter stacked recreational player, can lead very aggressively here. Already the value region is pretty slim. Villain saying, I have deuces, I have ace deuce, I have ace jack, ace 10, ace 5, ace 6, ace 7, ace 8. It's not a lot of hands, you know, villain can't value bet a 9 for this sizing. We beat that anyway, but it's not the point. We're rambling, we're failing already. We call, turn is a 4, we check. They bet again, really easy call. And the river is a deuce, we check, and they bet this sizing. So what are they saying? They're saying that they started off with like 600 combos, really wide range configuration. Here's the thing, guys. When your opponent starts off with 1 million combos that could be turned into bluffs, they don't have to have a very high, what I call cognitive bluff frequency to start over-bluffing. That means that they don't have to have the thought, oh, I'm going to just like bluff this guy very often at all before they're not just over-bluffing, but they maybe even have more bluffs than value. They should have about 30% of their range here as bluffs and the rest is value bets. That's not the case. They're massively over-bluffing. If you fold here, you don't deserve to play the game. But honestly, you know, you've got something extremely wrong with you if you fold in this spot. Your red line is probably diving off a cliff. I'm sorry that you don't want to hear that. That's the harsh truth, guys. Much love. You know I love you guys, but you've really got to stop folding here. It's absurd. You're going to win like 70% of the time in a spot where you need 30% equity. You're not okay with that? You should be okay with that. You should be more okay with that. Hell, even if you were winning 35% of the time, this would be a comfortably winning call. Next hand, ace 6. Go for an open, villain calls 4-3 deuce. Checking this with pretty much everything, not too concerned. Solid strategy, not really a reason to deviate, I don't think. Ace of spades on the turn. We decide to check again. The problem with betting is that people bet way too many of their one pair and draws on the flop. So most of their bad hands here have very low equity, too low equity in fact to call a bet in reality if we want to hand read properly here. So we check again to a range that's really polar to things that are crushing us or things that are going to bluff us, and there's not a whole lot in between. We can't even value a bet against a single ace-x combo. So easy call, easy check rather. Deuce of hearts river, we go for the value bet now. They fold, not much to say, but definitely a spot where you do not want to bet the turn against a human. By the way, nobody plug a spot into a fucking solver today, guys. Nobody be like, GTO wizard actually says that, Like, don't do that. Just don't do it. Because we're not here to talk about what your stupid solver says. We're here to talk about what the best plays against our opponent's real range, and we will reference theory. Of course we will. We always do. That's our starting point. But you can't use that as a refutation of my play. You can't. It doesn't work. We're not talking about playing against the solver. We're not talking about following GTO. We're only using poker theory as a rough understanding. Anyway, I'm never going to get through these hands. I'm never going to achieve 14 hand reviews. Jack 10-9, cutoff versus big blind, recreational player. Really soft pool. You can win massive BB per 100 in this pool, despite the fact the rake is high, in my opinion. That's my honest opinion. They check. We check back. The 4 of clubs comes on the turn. They check. We check back. The jack of diamonds comes to the river. They bet. What do you do? Well, I mean, they're probably not bluffing for this sizing. This is a very value-y sizing. Shut up. Easiest call you've ever seen. Recreational player, picks a random bet size, should only be bluffing 20% of the time. You're probably going to win like 40% of the time here, maybe 50. Ace 7. I bet you guys fold there sometimes. Shame on you. 10-8 in the small blind, go for an open. This is one we actually lose. We don't win all of these hands. Go for a check, villain goes for a bet, we go for a raise. What are you going to do? Like, how are you going to defend yourself against this kind of aggression when you are probably some random player that just lazily stabs? I mean, with a name like Defa2F0E, you must be pretty bad at cards. Yeah, I'm just kidding. These are like generic robot-generated names. So we raise, they call, the 5 comes on the turn. This is not a great card for range. Okay, we can check raise a bit 5x here, but villain will have a lot more than we will. We will also just suffer from the problem here of having less pocket 5s, which is something we claim to have, less 7-5, which is something we claim to have, and less jack 5, all things we claim to have when we raise the flop. So we do have to be a bit careful here with bottom of range, probably giving up some of the lower EV sort of gutter combos. This one you probably can go ahead and barrel again, like I don't hate it, but on this river, I got the sensation that this was probably not a great bluff with 8 of hearts. We're blocking king 8 of hearts, queen 8 of hearts, ace 8 of hearts. Bit of GTO here. I think it's close in theory, but I give up with the 8 of hearts in our hand, and I think in practice, this is an underfolded spot. I think if we B75 here, for example, we'll just get too many lookups from things like 7x and jack x, etc. I also think people just check a bit overprotected on this node on the turn. So not a spot I really fancy bluffing. They show down with this hand, which probably would have folded, but you know, you can't win them all. You can't be psychic. You can't know your opponent's cards exactly. 10-7 of clubs now in the small blind. We go for this open. They call. Queen 8-5, we go for a small bet and villain calls. The jack of clubs comes in the turn. Really high frequency barrel here in theory. No reason to deviate. Probably going to use pot, over bet, big bet. All of these are fine. We go for B75 this time. No problem. Villain calls. And yeah, this is one of these spots where, so this gets paired. Obviously the 8, the queen is likely folding infrequently. We block a ton of the folding range. We block 9-7. We block clubs. We block all sorts of folds. Looks like an easy give up. Can't win them all. And yeah, we run into queen 9, probably not a hand that's going anywhere. Definitely a give up on the 8. We do have some bluffs here and have some actual jams there as well. You're going to have some value bets like pocket queens that are absolutely enormous. You could play some jams here. A few, but most of your value bets would be smaller with the 8 pairing on the river, and I don't think this is one of our bluffs, so you got to know when to give up as well. Well, this is a video about using aggression, hand reading, being a free thinker, and not relying on an RNG and exploiting. It's also good to know the bad spots to bluff in. Go for a tiny c-bet here. This is just going to be an overfolded spot where people really struggle to defend. We turn top pair. You could bet or check here. The hand's good enough to value bet for, not for an overbet or anything, but we decide to just check this time. And villain checks the river, really easy value bet on this node, and we go for B75, get called by pocket 8s with a spade. Don't think this is too thin at all. In theory, people are quite good at slow playing, or solvers are quite good at slow playing flushes and going for tricky trappy things on the river with boats and stuff like that. In reality, you actually have to value bet a lot thinner against your human opponents than you would against your robotic opponents when you're in the GTO trainer, for example. So always looking at going for a couple of streets of value in that hand. Despite the texture, ace queen of hearts, we open button to 2.5x, get call. 10-5-5, and it goes check small bet. This is mainly functioning as a value bet. You can of course bet here for many different reasons. Bluffing is not one of them yet, at least. Very few cards will bluff on. This hand is just very high up in showdown values. This is not the sort of hand we're planning on blasting a ton of turns with. We're actually looking to check back on the turn, do some bluff catching on the river, and do some value betting. If we hit top pair, we'll have an extremely dominant and value bettable for multiple streets hand. So they call, we have the king of spades turn. I don't think this is ever a bet. I don't think there are enough better hands folding. Yes, you could target sixes. Target is another one of these really bad, problematic thought processes, guys. If you say targeting, what you're really doing is you're being lazy, you're making poker easier for you by like simplifying this game tree to a point where you've blotted out all the other hands in their range and you're targeting sevens by betting here. But when you target sevens by betting, you're losing extra money to king jack, you're losing extra money to 10x, you're not winning anything from air, you're blowing yourself off the pot sometimes when you get raised, although it'll be super rare on this turn that you get raised. So yes, this is a great turn for your range. It's a card on which you want to be really aggressive, but I don't think ace queen is going to get in there. It's just a little bit too high up. If we were under the gun or hijack, you could definitely blast this because you'd be way lower down in your range and your opponent would be folding a lot more of the pocket pair region and even some 10x in those positions, but not here. They go for a donk bet here. This is really bizarre, so we didn't even get the chance to see bet the turn. Forgot this happened actually, so yeah, easy call. Like, we're beating all the air still. We have a ton of nothing redraw, just nothing else to say. Check, check, and we win against ace four. This is the kind of thing that happens. People just big donk betting on turns that are terrible for their range. So obviously a really bad play by the opponent, but with the nut flush draw, it can't be that bad. But yeah, bad play in general. Strategically very silly to construct a big donk bet range in that spot. Jack 4 of diamonds now. Go for an open, villain calls, a flop of 5-3 deuce. These hands are basically just from one session, by the way. It's more of a VPIP kind of filter we've got on here, as I said in the intro. So we check back here and decide to bink the jack turn, willed it into existence. Not really, it just came and we're pretty happy about life. Go for the big value bet here, villain calls, 3 of diamonds, river. They check, and this is another spot where in GTO the solver might get a bit squeamish. It might be like, okay, the 3 paired, they have some bigger jacks in their range that check call the turn bet. You're going to get raised sometimes, bluff raised, value raised if you reopen here with a bet and you don't get called by that much worse, but you actually do. And in practice, the thing is that people are leading their good jack X way too frequently on the turn. They're just not check calling those hands, and the 3x combos are few and far between. This is just a card that's so low it's not going to exist very often. So going for value here I think is good, and it's not too thin. We get called by 8. It's pretty standard hand, just going for the 2 bets there with the jack 4. That's definitely what we want to be doing. 10-6 now, we go for a peel. Queen, queen, deuce is the flop. We check. They go for a small bet and we call. The turn is the 3 of spades. We check and they check. 5 of spades in the river. Mandatory bet, obviously. Like, you're never checking the 10 high busted flush draw here. Yes, busted flush draws aren't on average good hands to bluff. However, when you have filtered by calling a flop C bet and your opponent has checked back on the turn, your range is entitled to loads of the pot. Their range is entitled to very little. They have a massive air disadvantage, meaning they have the bad thing. Their range contains loads of air and yours doesn't. So while you do have some bluffs here, like 10-6 of diamonds, even if you bet all of them, you're still not over bluffing. Your opponent can't profitably call much, and this is the spot you just have to bluff. Of course, like, sizing is another thing. And exploitatively here, I just decided that flush draws are terrible at checking turns. In these pools at 100 NL, people are just very bad at slow playing the turn with a flush draw overall. If you're listening to this and you're like, actually, I slow play the turn with a flush draw. Yeah, I'm not talking about you, mate. Do you think you're the whole pool? And do you even do that? Like, are you sure? You might think you do because you saw it in a solver. I bet you don't. I bet you still play like you played in 2008 and you just don't realize. Shame on you. So we go for the overbet. I like the sizing a lot, and the reason is that the top of villain's range is the most absent part. So the queen and the flush draw are the 2 types of hands that pool are very, very bad at checking back, basically. So while they'll have some bluff catchers here, like ace 5, king 3, jack 5, etc., that they just bet on flop and gave up on turn. Wait, this isn't button, this is hijack. Ignore most of those hands. Ace 5, king 5 suited, stuff like that. 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, this sort of thing. Aces, they'll have bluff catchers of that variety, but they will not have the flush or the queen X or the hand that can call the overbet without thinking. So a lot of the auto defends that we do run into against the solver here are absent from the range, and therefore ostensibly the best sizing is just the biggest one that causes the most fold equity, and exponentially so from the stuff that is in the range that we just mentioned. So I love overbet here. You could block bet here in theory. You can B75. You have a corresponding value region to all of these sizes. For example, you have pocket 3s, you have pocket 5s, these can overbet. You have a spade flush that can overbet. You have a hand like a queen that can B75 or maybe overbet if it's a good queen. You have a hand like pocket 10s that can block bet. So you have value sizes for all bet sizes here, so you can bluff any size in theory, but I think the size works the best in practice due to the aforementioned reasons. Ace queen, go for an opening cutoff, big blind makes the peel. Queen 3 deuce, always betting here, going to use big bets on this flop against a recreational player. You can tell just how much softer this pool is than 100 NL on some other sites like Stars, because there's loads of recreational players at every table, and even the regs are like total bozos in this pool. No offense, guys. So we bet, they call the Jack of Hearts. You could definitely overbet here. We go for B75 in this case, which I think is also fine. I do think the weaker players do have a propensity to overfold slightly to overbets here, so I'm a big fan of using overbets as bluffs against random recreational players in this spot. I think it's hard for them to meet the defense frequency on a card that's bad for their range like the Jack. If you get a turn card that's actually quite good for your opponent's range in absolute terms, what you'll probably find is that they over-defend against the overbet by just making calls with hands that look like natural calls. But when you're in a turn like this, it's more likely they overfold because GTO is going to demand that they call some hands like Ace 3, 5-3, some kind of Jack X, Queen X hands. Obviously, pair plus flush draw is a call in GTO, but there'll be some other hands that aren't that they're meant to call here. So there's maybe some argument for sizing down here, but I think overbet would still be okay. 4 of diamonds river, they check again, and of course we want to go for a third value bet. I decide that something around pot here is good. We don't get paid off this time, but yeah, can't always get paid off. Ace 4 of hearts here under the gun, we go for the open. We get a raise by the big blind, already giving away their status as weaker player. When you're in the big blind, you want to go bigger than this. You have this polarized range, you want to go large. Your value region is mighty. It's like ace king, queens plus a bit of jacks maybe. Not that much else, maybe some ace queen suited, but really this is a polarized range. It should be going massive. We decide to peel ace 4. I think it's really profitable. Villain bets here. We decide to peel, and when they check on the turn, we check back, and when they check on the river, we check back. We're winning against ace king. We're winning against ace queen. There's really no reason to turn this into a bluff. We're not going to get a ton of fold equity from better. Really easy check down, and this time villain doesn't go for the turn bet with ace queen with the queen of hearts, which is a little bit tighter. You do want to barrel this more than the other hands, the other ace queen combos, because you want to block the flush draw that might jam on you or call you. You want to block the continuance range. You want to unblock the folding range, and you want to be able to hit a queen without it being a heart, which means the queen of hearts is a pretty good queen to have. So villain could have been a bit more aggressive there. Wouldn't have worked for them in this occasion, but yeah, it's worth thinking about. By the way, if villain did barrel the turn there and then triple the river, we'd have a really nice call down hand if we didn't want to overfold exploitatively, because we unblock the bluffs with the busted flush draw here. Busted flush draw is not meant to follow through on a river like this, and of course the 4 is a really nice blocker as well. It could potentially, I don't think it blocks much value, but it certainly doesn't block any bluffs in this position either, I don't think. Pocket nines, go for the 3-bet, villain calls, king, jack 10. Kind of a horrible board for you in the sense that you have a kind of mergy range here. You have ace king, you have aces, you have ace jack, you have like quite a lot of mergy hands, you have queens. Villain's range meanwhile is very polar. They don't have ace king really, they don't have queens, they don't have aces. They tend to have jacks, 10s, ace queen, and then like a heap of horrible underpairs with just a few hands in between, like the queen jack, king queen type of hands, maybe some ace 10 suited. So overall, their range is way more polar than yours, and when that's the case, you really don't want to be making large bets. You don't want to be putting a lot of money into the pot. You want to keep the pot small root most of the time so that you don't cause this very obvious canyon to emerge in their range where all of the bad hands go away and the good hands continue. Avoid making that big split in their range. The king comes on the turn. We check. Here I just thought my opponent was probably not bluffing enough. They're a random player that looked passive. I don't think they're bluffing enough underpair here, so easy check down. I think we've got very little showdown value here in theory, but much more in practice because of people's propensity to suck at poker and never bluff with hands like this. Ask yourself, if you're not bluffing with pocket sevens, what are you bluffing with? Probably not very much. I think this hand has the option to bet at least sometimes on the turn and on the river as played as well. Ace 10 of diamonds now. We're flying through these hands, guys. We're getting there. We're almost there, man. We've got like 2 more hands to go. We're going to do this. We're going to do this in like 20 minutes. We 3-bet the ace 10 of diamonds. Aren't you guys proud of me? If you're proud of me for being able to actually cover a session in 20 minutes, then give me a little pat in the head in the comments. Just a little asterisk pat in the head asterisk thing will do nicely. Or maybe you can find an emoji for that. Or maybe you could come to my house and actually give me a little congratulatory little pat there, you know. King, queen 5, we go for a c-bet, which is good. It's fine. You want to bet this flop at high frequency, of course. Ace on the turn. Villain checks again. Now, this is the sort of spot where your hand sucks a lot more than you think it does. Because if you think about your opponent's range here, they have ace queen. They have king queen sometimes, although they'll raise flop a lot. They have a little bit of like ace 10 of clubs and stuff that you're like a dog against and wouldn't really want to bet against. And then they have a little bit of stuff that you beat, like queen jack and king jack, that can't invest that much more money in the pot. So given that you have a gutter to the nuts still, sort of, well you do, but it's not a very good draw, and you have a lot of showdown value, betting this is a polarization mistake. I think betting big here, even though you just turn top pair, is still a polarization mistake in this spot, and I wouldn't build any small bets into my strategy in a hand like this. I'd just be using big bets because I want to value bet comfortably and thickly if I'm going to reopen the action in position, not like thinly in a way where I end up folding some equity when I get jammed on without even making a good value bet. So need to be a bit careful here. I don't think this is ever a bet. Villain checks. I think now this is where it gets really close. Like, okay, the obvious hands that come to mind are like King Jack, Queen 10, King 10. Problem is, a lot of those fold pre or 4-bet pre in these positions, so they're very few and far between, combinatorically speaking. Maybe there's like some ace 4 of clubs, ace 10 of clubs as well, but a lot of villain's range is also going to be a trap here. There's going to be some hands like ace queen, just hoping that we bluff with some underpair. There's going to be some hands like ace jack that just don't consider themselves strong enough to value bet, but will check call. And yeah, I think it's really too thin to value bet again here. It really does suck, but in this configuration in a 3-bet pot, I think ace 10 is a check. I would think again with ace jack. Now we're getting into value bet territory, perhaps, especially with like the Jack of Hearts blocker. But yeah, I think this one is just a check. Cutoff versus button 3-bet pot. 3-bet pot ranges are just tighter, they're stronger. Quite happy with this one that we didn't try and make a value bet here. Against some really passive players, you can make the ruling that if they had, or really ABC players, that if they had ace queen plus or even ace jack plus, they might bet a lot. Then maybe you can go for this, but I think this is too thin, especially on the flushing river. Finally, ace deuce. This is a hand I 3-bet a lot, blind versus blind, really nice 3-bet bluff hand. This time we just call. Jack 9-6 is the flop, and it goes check check. We do want some float bets here, but this hand is terrible. Has very little connectivity to the board. It does have an ounce of showdown value in some branches of the tree, where we chop with other ace X and stuff like that. I think check is fine here. Ace on the turn, they go for a bet, we go for a call. 9 on the river, they go for a bet. And here, really, it's not a happy spot. It's not going to be the most bluff spot in the world, but here's the thing. When you start out blind versus blind, your range is very wide. You have a lot of random combos that you could be bluffing with on the turn. You have all kinds of gutters. You have some random hands as well that might just take a stab. And people do, you know, when you check when you didn't have to, people tend to do a lot of stabbing in these games because it does work. They're used to it working. So they make this bet and easy call at 3-1. Like, we're not happy about life, but please don't fold here, guys. Don't fold here. Looks like we chopped against ace 3, which seems like a kind of thin value bet. I think on the 9 river, villain should definitely check or block this hand, probably just check. The reason being that we have a ton of busted stuff that can bluff. We now have a load of trips, and I don't think we're calling with that many worse hands against villain sizing. Maybe block third pot's okay. Don't really love the opponent's line here in this river. They have to react to this river that's good for our range in a much more placid way with a hand like that. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this fly through of a session where I just think I played well in this session. I felt cured. I felt like I was playing good poker. And I hope you enjoyed it. It's just one example of the sort of content we're going to be bringing you in the Carrot Corner subscriber library come September. See you in the next video at Carrot Corner. Good luck at tables. Bye for now.